Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. Let's do it. Let's get to it. Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. It is Friday, the 13th of September, 2024. I'm your host, Jon Jeune, and as usual, on Fridays, we will be doing the matchup show. Again, if you guys are new to it, I mean, the show is kind of new to you too. So, but if you weren't here last week, what I did was looked at guys that are a little bit under the radar, according to Fantasy Pros Expert Consensus Rankings, or ECR. Again, we're looking at quarterbacks and tight ends outside the top 10 in ECR, and then running backs and wide receivers outside the top 20 in ECR. The thought process there is those are the guys you're probably on the fence about. Should you put them in your lineup? Should you not? And so I'm here to give you a little bit more confidence, a little bit more insight into what I think about some of these guys. And like I said last week, as the season progresses, we're going to start looking, even at guys that are inside those thresholds that I don't feel like maybe should be, depending on, either the matchup or recent production or recent opportunities that they've been given or not been given. So, trying to be, a little bit more, again, showing you guys or talking through, giving you guys some more confidence in some of those guys under the radar that we should be playing, but also, going to help you navigate the fantasy landscape with some of those guys that, we've gotten to a place where we auto start them, right? We feel like when we're setting our lineup, those guys absolutely have to be in there just because of where we drafted them or the name or, so on and so forth. But that doesn't always have to be the case, as if you've played fantasy football for a long time, you'll know. But, even if, you're new to it, you probably don't even have some of these preconceived notions or these biases towards some of these players that you've drafted. You're just looking for that production. So, we'll try to navigate the whole thing, and I'm definitely here to help you do that. Last week was a pretty solid week. Talked through 17 players last week, and we had some hits in there. 9 guys who beat their expert consensus rankings by at least 10 spots or more. Jaden Reed, ECR wide receiver 37, finished as the PPR wide receiver number 1, scored 2 touchdowns. We had Stephon Diggs, ECR wide receiver 25, finished as the PPR wide receiver 9, also scored 2 touchdowns. Baker Mayfield, ECR quarterback 17, finished as the quarterback 2 on the week, threw for 4 touchdown passes. Definitely not Tyler Conklin. Jerome Ford, ECR running back 25, came in as the PPR running back 9. That one felt a little dirty as it was happening, but we'll take it. Khalil Shakir, ECR wide receiver 49, finished as the PPR wide receiver 25. Brian Thomas, ECR wide receiver 43, finished as the wide receiver 20. Tyler Algier was a big miss on my part. ECR running back 45, finished as the running back 60. Jalen Polk was a complete flop. Chase Brown flopped. Zach Moss, ECR running back 32, finished as the running back 22. Chuba Hubbard was a flop. Kobe Parkinson, that one hit. ECR wide receiver, ECR tight end 22, finishes at tight end 7 on the week. George Pickens, a little mini hit there. But, we were not expecting a whole lot in that matchup, but was the ECR wide receiver 30, finishes the wide receiver 24. So right on the cusp of being, he was a wide receiver 2, the final wide receiver 2. But what we did talk about with George Pickens was him seeing potentially that 30% target share. And anytime you go into a matchup, even if it's a bad matchup, which the Atlanta Falcons defense is perceived to be a bad matchup, at least from what we believe we know, with 1 week of football, um, he was able to see that 30% target share, and fantasy production was able to come out of it. So, all in all, it was a pretty good day. I'm willing to live with that. I mean, again, we had Zamir White was a miss, Daniel Jones was a miss. Um, Bo Nix, I don't really feel comfortable claiming that, although I did say it was more of a QB2 deep league play there in at the quarterback position. But all in all, if every week, obviously we want to be perfect, but I'm not going to be perfect. But and I'm not going to have weeks like this every week. So, I'm just here to continue to run a process. If that process yields good results, then that's great. But obviously, I'm trying to be process oriented as opposed to result oriented. So, hopefully, you ride it out with me all year, because I'm gonna give you what I got regardless. But moving on to some matchups, let's talk some football here. The first matchup that I'll discuss is the New Orleans Saints against the Dallas Cowboys, and the player that I'm looking at right there is going to be Dallas wide receiver Brandon Cooks. He's the ECR PPR wide receiver 44. Again, everything we talk about in this setting is going to be points per reception. So take it from, look at it through that lens, right? If you play half PPR, then maybe you might have to make your own determinations, or feel free, if you're watching live here on YouTube, Twitch, Instagram Live, feel free to leave a comment. I'll do my best to answer the question live here. But if you follow me at the real Jon J _FF on both X and Instagram. If you DM me, I'll do my best to answer your question in a timely manner. As long as I see it, I will respond to any and every DM that I get. So, feel free to reach out to me with questions there as well. And yeah, so that being said, ECR PPR wide receiver 44, Brandon Cooks, saw a 23% target share last week. Which was second only to CD Lamb going back to last year, and including week 1 of this year. The New Orleans Saints are a bottom 3 matchup for opposing running backs, while being a top 3 matchup for opposing wide receivers. And that includes, again, last week when they faced the Panthers, who couldn't get anything done on offense. So I think Cooks has wide receiver 2 upside this week after just finishing as a wide receiver 21 just last week. So, I think Cooks has, pretty good, he's got a pretty good justification to be in your lineups as a wide receiver too. I don't see him being the wide receiver 44 seems a little egregious to me. Again, I know it's only been one week, but Cooks came on at the end of last year, and he's continuing that this year, again, with a 23% target share. I like that number. So, assuming that the Dallas Cowboys and New Orleans Saints, that matchup does, a lot of points are found in that matchup. I like Brandon Cooks to finish inside at least wide receiver 3 territory for at the least. So, moving on to Tampa Bay and Detroit. Tampa Bay quarterback Baker Mayfield, yes, going back to the Baker well this week. He's the ECR quarterback 14. And I'm going to continue to go back to this well as long as the matchups make sense and the ECR doesn't. This game sets up nicely as a matchup in a dome with the highest total on the week. Baker played well last week in a great matchup. And so going back to last year, the Detroit Lions allow the 8th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. And I think Baker can finish as a QB1 again this week. If you've listened to me for a while, you'll understand, or you'll know that I actually am one of the people that like Baker Mayfield. I think he's a good player. I think he's a good quarterback. And, as shown last year when he was in an offense surrounded by good weapons, look what happens, right? And I think that's only going to continue this year as he gets some of these matchups here. So moving on to uh, the Cleveland versus Jacksonville game. Uh, I'm going with Jacksonville running back Tank Bigsby. He's the ECR running back 47. Now, I've been banging the proverbial drum for Tank Bigsby all offseason, and week one was nice to see him involved in what amounted to a 50-50 split in terms of rush attempts with Travis Etienne. And the cherry on top of that was he outperformed Etienne in the rushing department as well. Now, I'm not expecting this to happen every week, but it just reinforces the idea that Bigsby can and most likely will have a role in this offense. In this matchup against Cleveland, which going back to last season allowed the 11th most PPR points to the running back position. I think he can be a useful RB3 for those that need help at the position this week, especially in deeper leagues or if you're looking for a low end flex play. I think Bigsby can definitely provide some value there. And I talked about him in the waiver show. He should be rostered. I'm not sure where his roster percentage is right now. I know when we talked about it on Tuesday, he was available in 94% of Yahoo leagues. I mean, I can quickly check where he's at right now, but he's a guy that I feel like should be more highly rostered. Yeah, he's only rostered in 26% of Yahoo leagues, so he's available in 74% of Yahoo leagues. So that number's gone up a little bit, but again, I would look to roster him because again, I don't want to never wish injury on anybody, but were Travis Etienne to go down, we obviously know what this what that means for Tank Bigsby here, who unlike Etienne, Bigsby was actually drafted by this regime, by this coaching staff. Not to say that that's a knock against Etienne, but it's got to be a feather in the cap for Bigsby, right? So, and if you listen to to Doug Peterson all offseason, he's talked about how, uh, how much they like Bigsby, how much they want to get him involved, and all these different things. So definitely like that as we progress through the fantasy season. So moving on to the San Fran versus Minnesota game, going with Minnesota running back Aaron Jones. He's the ECR running back 21. Now, again, I don't make the rules. Oh, wait, I actually do make the rules here, but he's outside the top 20 at the running back position. And I get the matchup here against San Fran is a tough one, but he's going to see some volume here from Minnesota and also a bulk of the work inside the red zone, seeing 100% of the carries inside the 5-yard line. Now, to be honest, I don't particularly love any of the other options in this game. Whether on the San Fran side, you had guys that are ranked too high, or on the Minnesota side, I mean, they're in a tough matchup against the San Francisco 49ers. And I'm not going to tell you that you need to play Justin Jefferson. You already know that. But I'm also not going to recommend Sam Darnold or any of the other San Fran passing options in this matchup right here. So Aaron Jones was kind of that guy that was in the middle. He was outside the top 20, but he's the guy I probably felt the most comfortable with through this period of time to recommend playing. And as I said, I'm not gonna at this. I think it's too early to start telling you guys who to not play. I don't think we know what we don't know yet. And so as we get, I think, past week 3, so into week 4, where we have this year's data to work off of, because right now I'm using a combination of this year's data and last year's data. But once we get into, again, week 4 and we have three weeks worth of data to work off of, I feel more comfortable planting my flag in some of those areas. But for right now, being a little bit more conservative in that realm. Moving on to the next matchup, we got the LA Chargers facing the Carolina Panthers. And I've got 2 guys in this game. First one is going to be LA Chargers running back Gus Edwards. He's the ECR running back 37. Obviously, J.K. Dobbins had the big week last week, and I still think he's ranked a bit too low as the running back 20. I think he should be a little bit higher here, but we will go with his backfield mate and Gus Edwards, who actually did see a larger percentage of the rush attempts last week. but just didn't have the explosive plays that Dobbins did. But this week, he also gets the same fantastic matchup that Dobbins gets with the Carolina Panthers, who have allowed the fifth most PPR points to opposing running backs going back to last season. So I definitely feel like Gus Edwards, who was a letdown last week, I don't know how many people started him. I was taking the wait and see approach, but I know some people, if they were desperate, they probably put him in there and they were underwhelmed with the production. I think he bounces back this week and gets us, hopefully into that RB2 territory, but definitely should return some RB3 value at the least. Moving on to the next guy in this game, and that is on the Chargers side, because I'm not touching the Panthers right now. LA Chargers tight end Hayden Hurst. He's the ECR tight end 35. Staying again on the LA Chargers side, Hayden Hurst saw a 12% target share, which led the Chargers tight ends, but also gets a matchup against Carolina, who going back to last year allowed the second most PPR points to the two opposing tight ends. And if you like narratives, this is a revenge game for Hurst, who most recently played for the Carolina Panthers. So again, tight end is usually a mess. If you're looking for a tight end to play, you just need, a plug and play option, or you're in one of those deeper leagues, or, I'm in a a couple of two tight end leagues actually. So, Hayden Hurst makes a ton of sense as a streamable option at the tight end position. Moving on to, it looks like I have to update my banner here, so give me a second. But the next game I'm going to talk about is the Las Vegas Raiders and the Baltimore Ravens here. And the player I'm talking about there is Jakobi Meyers, Las Vegas wide receiver Jakobi Meyers. Myers had a good week last week, not expecting the Raiders to really keep this one close. So they will need to pass the football here. And I think Myers has should be a decent option. Should see a decent amount of targets against the Ravens in the middle of the field. He's the ECR wide receiver 50. Again, Baltimore struggled last week against Kansas City, especially in the middle of the field there. And against the wide receiver position, they've allowed the seventh most PPR points to the position going back to last season. So I think, again, the Raiders will need to pass the football on this one. I think Myers should see a decent amount of targets and going to bring back some wide receiver 3 production for us. So ECR wide receiver 50 seems a little low, but obviously after the Raiders' performance last week, it's tough to have confidence in much of, if any, of their offensive weapons there. But I think out of desperation, we should see some things happen here for the Las Vegas Raiders and Jakobi Meyers especially. So moving on to the next matchup, we got the Seattle Seahawks against the New England Patriots. And I'm going with Seattle wide receiver Tyler Lockett, ECR wide receiver 46. The Patriots defense is actually pretty good, especially against the pass. They've got a strong secondary and they've got a strong defensive front. So I don't particularly feel great about this one. But Lockett did see a team high 29% target share, which, again, I understand this probably is as much as anybody else in the Seattle offense, especially with DK Metcalf there. This is going to ebb and flow as the season goes on, right? There'll be games where Tyler Lockett leads the team in targets. There'll be games where DK Metcalf leads the team in targets. And then eventually at some point, we'll see Jackson Smith-Njigba get involved there as well. So, I understand that this is going to ebb and flow, and it might be a little dangerous to chase the 29% target share that Tyler Lockett saw last week. But as I'm thinking about this, right, he was the most productive Seattle wide receiver last week, but he's ranked third amongst the Seattle wide receivers in terms of ECR. That just doesn't feel right to me. I mean, I get why people would rank DK Metcalf, slightly higher or higher, and that's because, DK Metcalf is a freak of nature. He prototypes as the wide receiver one. He, is capable of having these big games over 100 receiving yards, multiple touchdowns. So I get that, right? You're chasing that upside with DK Metcalf. You don't need to tell me to chase upside. I do that all the time. But Tyler Lockett, he's got to be ranked higher than Jackson Smith and Jigba. Like he has to be. And I love JSN coming into the offseason, but there's nothing that I've seen through 1 week of football. Again, it's 1 week. But there's nothing I've seen through 1 week of football that tells me that Tyler Lockett should be ranked below him. I mean, Tyler Lockett's role didn't look like it changed much from last year to this year. And that's kind of what we were banking on with drafting JSN higher than Tyler Lockett. Like if you were in fantasy leagues or fantasy drafts, that's what happened. So, now that rant's done, I think you can play Tyler Lockett this week as a wide receiver 3, potentially even a wide receiver 2, especially if Christian Gonzalez, who is the Patriots cornerback, he's a shutdown guy apparently. If he is spending most of his time on DK Metcalf, I don't think he travels actually. So, but by alignment, if he ends up on DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett should be able to operate against some of these other Patriots defensive backs. And again, operating that short to intermediate range, he can, possibly, make some plays there for us. So again, like him to finish in that wide receiver 2 to wide receiver 3 territory. But that's really all I've got on this game here. Moving on to the next matchup, we've got the Indianapolis Colts against the Green Bay Packers. And this one was a little tough for me. I wasn't quite sure because there are some pieces on the Packers side that I would have liked, but obviously with the injury to Jordan Love, it makes it a little bit tougher, and obviously that's impacting the ranking of some of these guys, the injury to Jordan Love. So, but one of the guys I would have loved to talk about here or talked about on waivers would have been Tucker Kraft, but it just doesn't really make sense to talk about him because then you have to watch Malik Willis play football, and then you'll think that why did John talk about a guy that's tied to Malik Willis? Yeah, essentially. So I'm going with Indianapolis wide receiver Alec Pierce. He's the ECR wide receiver 67. Talked about him in the waiver show on Tuesday. There wasn't a ton of volume in the passing game for Indianapolis last week, but as Pierce showed, he doesn't need a ton of volume. He played more snaps than teammate Adonai Mitchell, but Mitchell saw more targets. So assuming Indianapolis is leading this game a decent amount and they're not getting into 3 wide receiver sets, I expect Pierce to be on the field, which against the Green Bay defense that's allowed the 9th most PPR points to the position going back to last season. I like his prospects to finish as a wide receiver 3 or 4. I mean, I talked about Pierce in the waiver show. He's that nitro button, right? We're just looking for big plays, a touchdown maybe. Maybe 2. So, this is one of those things where you live by the sword, you die by the sword kind of thing. So, Anthony Richardson's not going to throw the ball a ton. So this is, 2-3 big plays here that we are looking for from Alec Pierce. So again, if you are projected to lose or maybe your opponent has Anthony Richardson, maybe you can get away with sticking Alec Pierce in your matchup, in your lineup here, and hoping that you get a big play out of it. So moving on to the next matchup here, we've got the New York Jets taking on the Tennessee Titans. And I mean, this one felt really easy to me. I didn't even think much about it. Tennessee running back Tony Pollard, he's the ECR running back 26. Going back to the Pollard well this week after he hit for us last week, get in the end zone and obviously taking the bulk of the work there at the running back position. He gets another plus matchup against the New York Jets that struggle to defend the run since going back to last year. They are the number 1 matchup for opposing running backs in PPR scoring. And again, like I mentioned, Pollard was the lead running back to Tajay Spears by a wide margin, seeing 62% of the team's rush attempts. And I like Pollard here to finish as definitely a high end RB2, but could potentially bring back some RB1 value here for us, uh, depending on how many times he gets in the end zone. So, Tony Pollard, have yourself a day, brother. Moving on to the next matchup, we've got the New York Giants taking on the Washington Commanders, and staying with the running back position. I'm going with Washington running back Brian Robinson. He's the ECR running back 23. Brian Robinson had a solid week last week, finishing as the RB14, had 16 total opportunities, and now gets a matchup against a New York Giants defense that is just terrible all around. He's a slight favorite at home, so I definitely think an RB2 finish is a high end RB2 finish is in his range of outcomes again this week, potentially even an RB1 finish. Jaden Daniels stole 2 goal line rushing touchdowns. If one of those would have went to Brian Robinson last week, we're talking about an even bigger day for Brian Robinson. So again, the Giants are terrible. Their defense is not very good, and I like Robinson to finish as a high on RB2 with potentially some RB1 value here for us. Moving on to the next game, we've got the LA Rams taking on the Arizona Cardinals. And I'm going back to another well this week, a guy we talked about last week. That's LA Rams tight end Kobe Parkinson. He is the tight end 12. So he's ranked as a tight end 1, but some people may have some, reservations about him. Again, we talk about at the onesie positions, guys that are outside that top 10, because, once you get to especially tight end, once you're looking out past the top 7, 8 guys, all those guys pretty much get clumped together, and the range of outcomes is very similar for all of them, near that bottom end. But, between tight end, I'd say 9 to like 15 or 16. So, Kobe Parkinson, another guy we talked about last week, but I think he's in line for an even bigger role, as I mentioned in the waiver show on Tuesday with the injury to Puka Nacua. And he's a candidate for increased targets. And then you throw the matchup in here. The Cardinals allow the 5th most PPR points to the tight end position since going back to last season. I know Dalton Kincaid didn't have a big game, but if you look at how that came to be, the Cardinals were hell-bent on not letting Dalton Kincaid catch the football. He was facing double and triple teams incessantly. So I like Kobe Parkinson here. I mean, he's not going to get that attention that Dalton Kincaid got. That's going to go to Cooper Kupp, who's going to see 1,000,000 targets in this game. So I like the Kobe Parkinson again to take on some of the Puka targets, as well as again seeing this matchup here against the Arizona Cardinals. I think he definitely finishes as tight end 1. I know he's ranked that way, but again finishes the tight end 7 last week. I think he can bring back that tight end 10 or better value, because that's what we're striving here for with these tight ends, right? They're outside the top 10. I'm not going to tell you to play a tight end just so he can finish as the tight end 16. So, trying to get inside that top 10 with these tight end recs. So, moving on to the next game here, and we're going with another tight end. I guess I'm showing tight ends some love today, but Cincinnati Bengals against the Kansas City Chiefs. The Cincinnati tight end Mike Gesicki, ECR tight end 20. His matchup here, again, this matchup, there wasn't really anyone that I felt super confident about. And that's not to say I feel like uberly confident about Gesicki, but the Chiefs struggled against the tight end position last week, mainly against Isaiah Likely. And with the Bengals expected to trail in this game, Burrow's going to have to throw the ball to somebody. Jamar Chase, obviously, we know him, and he'll get a bunch of attention from the Chiefs. But T. Higgins looks unlikely to play again. So I think Gesicki ends up as a beneficiary here, and should see a decent amount of targets in this one. So moving on to the next matchup, we've got the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Denver Broncos. And I'm going with Pittsburgh quarterback Justin Fields. He's the ECR quarterback 16. And look at that. Another waiver wire guy ending up on this list today. On paper, this does not look like a good matchup. And well, that's probably because it's really not. But that's if you're looking at the Denver defense against quarterbacks. But what doesn't factor in is Justin Fields and what he does with his legs. And we don't really care about the matchup. Again, we care about his ability to make plays with his legs. And as long as Justin Fields is playing football, as long as he's playing and he's on the field, he will make plays with his legs. So if you need a quarterback, maybe you lost Jordan Love, you just want a high floor guy who's not going to bottom out for you, and guy that's maybe susceptible to a bad matchup, right? Justin Fields is your guy. And if he runs for a touchdown or maybe two, we're talking about him even having a bigger day here. So, as I mentioned, I I do believe that Russell Wilson gets his job back at some point, but I've got to prepare. We've got to prepare for the range of outcomes, the possibility that Mike Tomlin, if he sees his team winning with Justin Fields under center, might not want to change anything. So Justin Fields has been sitting out there on waivers. I know he's starting to get scooped up in some of my leagues. Um, but he's still out there. And so with that being said, I mean, I feel like he should be rostered in more leagues. And I got to go check the numbers, but uh, we know what Justin Fields can do. If we were told that Justin Fields is going to be the starter all year long for the he's 16% roster, so available in 84% of leagues. If we knew that Justin Fields was going to be the starter all year long, he would have been rostered. He'd be rostered in over 90% of leagues. It's just that uncertainty that people don't know whether he'll be the starter long term or whether he'll be the starter all year or how long he'll be the starter for, that he's not rostered. But I think we've got to prepare for the other side of the coin, what's within the range of outcomes, because we're not playing a game of certainty here. We're playing a game of probability. And again, as I said, I believe Russell Wilson gets his job back, but you got to hedge your bet sometimes. Again, moving on to the Chicago Bears and the Houston Texans. I'm going with Chicago wide receiver DJ Moore. He's the ECR wide receiver 23. So Roma Dunze is most likely out with a knee injury. Keenan Allen is banged up with a heel injury. And the Bears are 6.5-point dogs on the road against an offense that is capable of putting up points with the Houston Texans and CJ Stroud. DJ Moore saw a 29% target share, which was second only to Keenan Allen last week on the Bears. Caleb Williams didn't play particularly well, but in this game here in prime time, the matchup is good here for both Caleb Williams and DJ Moore. The Texans allow the fifth most fantasy points to the quarterback position and the sixth most PPR points to opposing wide receivers, again, going back to last season. And if again, Dunze most likely out, Keenan Allen banged up, that's more potential targets and opportunities here for DJ Moore. And if they're 6.5-point dogs, they'll be forced to pass. You would expect them to pass in a game on the road, in a dome, in prime time. Caleb Williams seems like a guy that's going to just, and again, I could be wrong here, but just if you go back to like his college days, like he just strikes me as a guy that's going to want to play well in prime time, that's going to play well in prime time as the lights get brighter here. And the matchup here is kind of set up for him to at least have a decent day. And I'm not, maybe this sounds like I'm, banging the drum here for Caleb Williams a little bit for him to be in starting lineups. I'm not saying that, not even a little bit at this moment in time. I'm kind of on wait and see mode with Caleb Williams right now. But I think this is good for DJ Moore, who has wide receiver one upside in this matchup here. So, again, ECR wide receiver 23, so he's inside that wide receiver 2 territory. But depending on what your roster looks like, you might be looking at him versus somebody else. I think he finishes as a wide receiver 1 this week. I'm going to kind of plant my flag there. So, yeah, he should be started accordingly. Moving on to the last matchup here, Monday Night Football, the Atlanta Falcons taking on the Philadelphia Eagles. Going real deep in the bag here, like real deep in the bag here. So give me Atlanta wide receiver Ray McCloud, ECR wide receiver 76. again, real deep in the bag here, but he led the Falcons in targets last week, and that might have a little to do with Kirk Cousins' unwillingness to throw the ball downfield. And I don't think it gets much better this week against an Eagles defensive front that should get after Cousins, who's coming off that Achilles, forcing him to get the ball out quickly, and most likely to McLeod, who operates in that short area of the field and looks to make plays after the catch. So this is a really deep league flex play. Nothing too crazy. Or if you have Keenan Allen and you're questionable about his availability and maybe makes you feel a little uncomfortable to go into the weekend with him as the last matchup, and you're not going to pick up. We're going to pick up Velus Jones or one of these other Bears wide receiver options. I would rather just go with McLeod at that point. But wide receiver 4, wide receiver 3, again, really deep league. If you're in like a 14 or a 16 team league, Ray McLeod makes some sense there. So that is all I have this week in terms of the matchups, guys. So again, if you make sure you're tapped in next week, we'll do the waiver show on Tuesday, but also make sure you're following me on social media at the real Jon J _FF on Instagram and Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter. Again, doing a lot more short form video content. We do the Thursday night picks, which went 5 for 5 yesterday. So definitely was happy to be able to do that. So if you go to my Instagram page, you'll see the reels there. Obviously, last week I also did starts of the week. That one was mixed bag of results there, but starts of the week usually is right. It's very rare to hit on all 4 starts of the week, but that's what I'm striving for. So check out, that video should be coming today, if not tomorrow morning. But yeah, good luck this weekend, y'all. Have a good one. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, wherever you may find podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify. Make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube channel or the Twitch, or make sure you turn the notifications on for whenever I go live on Instagram. And again, going to sort out the X stuff there as soon as we can. But that being said, y'all have a good one. Enjoy your football this weekend. And yeah, we're out of here. Peace.